All right. Good evening, everyone. So today we're going to talk a little bit about feature flags and OpenFeature. So what are we? All right, it's awake. So what are we going to look at today? Yes, there are a lot of items on this slide, and yes, they are a little wordy today, but I'm going to try to go as fast as I can and try and keep a little bit more focus on the interesting stuff. So who am I? Well, I'm the open source program manager at Dynatrace. Been there for about 2.5 years. I'm also maintainer, contributor, and community manager for Kepton and for OpenFeature. I dabble a little bit in OpenTelemetry, but again, mostly community stuff. If you're interested in having a look at some of the stuff I work on, you can head over to my GitHub profile and you'll find the 50 organizations I'm a part of. So, what are we going to hopefully learn or get out of this talk today? It's really just two simple things. One of them is getting started with feature flags. The other one is choosing an open source first approach. Why? Because I like open source and it's pretty easy and it's free. And that brings us immediately to the next part. So what are feature flags? I'm guessing everyone here is somewhat familiar. If you aren't, I'll let you know anyway what they are. Essentially glorified if statements. Ooh, everyone that hears that sentence is going to have a little shiver go down their back. Yes, that is true, but it's a bit more than that. So in their most basic form, yes, they can be an if statement. It can be essentially something is on or it's off. In their more elaborate states, they can do some pretty interesting things, and we're going to have a look at that. So what can you use feature flags for? I'm going to click about 50 times here because there are so many use cases for feature flags that we could talk about them all day. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. So what is a conditional control? Yes, we spoke of this. Condition is satisfied, feature flag is on or off, you receive a value. You know, it can go many ways. Gradual rollouts, anybody familiar with that? I mean, I'd hope so. Sorry? Yeah, good. All right, I'm happy about that. I mean, it's an SRE conference. Would be disappointed. So gradual rollouts, basically, instead of rolling out a feature immediately to all of your users, you can select a restricted group of people. You can do this based on role, based on hundreds of different factors. Yeah, how about testing and experimentation? Again, this kind of ties into the previous use for feature flags. Why? Well, if something, forgive my French, sucks, you don't want to roll it out to all of your users immediately. So having a restricted group of people trying this out first usually has some advantages. Yeah, here I put in some other things like collaboration, continuous delivery and DevOps. I mean, we can go into all of those, but they all tie into the same concepts in the end. Of course, many, many more. But let's skip ahead to some real world use cases. Yes, I put a lot of very popular names up here just to show you that feature flags are widely used in a very large number of cases. For example, we have continuous deployments and A/B testing. Does anyone know what A/B testing is? Yeah? Yeah, so in a few words, you know, yeah, pretty much. So you take a feature, you test it out on a group of people, you see what the feedback is. This feedback could be in qualitative data, like do the users like this feature? Does it make them happy? Or it could be even from analytics. You know, is your system performing the same way? Are you getting the same amount of sales? You can get an extremely large amount of data doing these type of tests, and you can use them in different ways. Who is this used by? Well, if it clicks. It didn't. Or it did for a second. I didn't see it. Anyhow. Or here I give another example of feature rollouts. Everyone knows the popular use case of e-commerces trying out new checkout systems. But this is, for example, something, if you even look at Amazon here, they do try out new methods, they do try out new features, but they also have differentiated features based on, your tier, based on what kind of user you are. Example, you're a Prime user, you have a different checkout, let's say, flow than a regular user. And this kind of strategy is used also by other companies. Slack does the same. If you are on a pro plan, you will have a lot more features. You'll be able to see history further than, I think, 30 days or 30,000 messages. I don't remember the exact quantity. And this can also be a way to upsell. So feature flags can go much further than just your, let's call it basic development needs. It can really tie into what are then your business needs. And I think the last one here is, at the same time, one of my favorite and one of my least favorite. So it's unlockable, unlockable content. This is like whenever you're downloading a new video game for your phone or for a platform like Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, you have a ton of parts of this game that can be unlocked simply by purchasing an additional piece. This could be done also with a feature flag. But why am I here today? So what is OpenFeature? So OpenFeature, it's in the name, is an open source project. Specifically, it's a specification. This project has had about, I think, 15,000 contributions at this point. It's been only going on for, I think, a year and a half, let's say 2 to be generous. We reached Sandbox, and we're aiming to get incubation by KubeCon North America. Actually, we have our last interview with our users in 4 days, so fingers crossed, everything will be good, and we'll get to the next level. Why am I telling you that we are a part of the CNCF? Simply, I want to stress that this project is independent. It is vendor agnostic. You don't have to worry about a licensing change. I'm not talking about anything that happened recently. And you don't have to worry about a single company driving the direction of this project. We have a governance committee, and this year we'll hold our first elections. So the first one was kind of bootstrapped and just made out of the original participants. And we also have a technical committee that makes sure the direction goes the right way, and our roadmap is public. So everyone knows what is happening in our project. And here I just wanted to show you a few of the lovely companies and people that participated in the creation of this project for now. You may notice there are quite a few feature flag vendors up there. And some might be thinking, oh, why would a feature flag vendor participate in a project that could be competing with their business? Simply because this isn't true. The idea behind OpenFeature is to actually increase the span of their business. So this was actually one of the first steps we took when starting the project. We reached out, feature flag vendors, and we said, hey, we have an idea for a new standard, a new specification, call it what you want. Would you be interested in participating? And we received really great feedback. Everyone was excited. Said, oh, great. Finally, we can do this. We've wanted to do this for years, but we don't really want to work with our competitors that much. And they needed somewhat of a facilitator there. And in this case, it was us. And slowly, we had companies from all backgrounds joining in, trying to help out. And some were just interested in using the final project. I think actually up here we have, I would say most of our first adopters. And you might be asking, so what is OpenFeature at this point? Yeah, a lot of text today. Sorry about that. Essentially, we're providing a specification that makes it simple for anyone that's using any vendor, any DIY solution to make the switch easy, to have multiple of these multiple solutions or multiple backends at the same time without having to change their code, without having complicated solutions in place. And that's kind of what brought us our, let's call it for now, success. So why should you use it? First of all, it works with your favorite vendor. So we're compatible with most vendors. Most vendors have worked with us. And so at this point, we support, I would say, pretty much, I think it's like 60 or 70% of the feature flagging market is supported. Yeah, integrates with open source projects. For example, we work with Argo, we work with Backstage, and we're slowly trying to, set up more integrations to make this a lot easier to use. And we're also starting to focus more on the telemetry. So getting data to actually have useful insights into what it means when you have a feature flag in place and what you can do to improve. Yeah, homegrown solutions can be supported. I mean, with a little note, you do have to write your own provider. What is a provider? We'll look at that in a few minutes. And you can actually keep your current setup. There's a very small change you'd have to make. You're not looking at a complete code refactor. You're looking at a small change that can pay off quite substantially in the long term, because you'll basically have to just switch your provider. And again, I'll show you how easy that is in about 2 minutes. So, spoke about DIY solutions, spoke about your own you're working with vendors, spoke about open source projects. Yes, you can use all of these together. I know, using multiple feature flag backends at the same time. Again, shivers, but you can, and it's not that complicated. And finally, yeah, if you want to test something out because you haven't started with feature flags yet, it's pretty simple. So let's hop in and, yeah. Sorry, this was supposed to be somewhere else. Not sure how it ended up here, but I just wanted to share with you some of the adopters that appreciated what we gave them and kind of continued then to use the project and are now, let's say, our ambassadors for continuing our success. So what are the different parts of OpenFeature? So we essentially have 4 critical parts. The first one is the evaluation API. What does this actually do, or what is it for? Well, this is the first point of contact for anyone that is working with feature flags. And if you have a application developer, this is what they will work with. So it's this little itty bitty bitty rectangle right there. And what does it do? Well, it really allows you to get the information from, to retrieve the flag values from your backend. You can have different, let's say, levels of the information that you retrieve. So you can have more basic information where you'll just have the flag ID and the value, or you can have more detailed information. And in that case, you'd really get, for example, what was the reason for this flag? What were if there's an error message, or the meaning of the error message. You can really go into depth and you can get a lot more out of it. Yeah, and again, I want to stress there's no change in the evaluation code. So you'll simply be swapping out your provider. And how simple is it? Well, let's have a look at that now. So with your providers, this is the part that performs the feature flag evaluation. It's this, let's see if this works for once. Yeah, close enough. Yeah, it's this beautiful little green part here. And this is basically the glue that holds everything together. And we've gotten to the point where we have a quite substantial coverage of providers. So you'll have one for each and every language, and also for each vendor. If you're planning on writing one also for your own DIY solution, you can do this. That's what our specification is for. It provides you all the details. And yeah, you can simply add it in there and it will be a part of our ecosystem. The other option I put down here, you don't want to have a DIY solution. You don't want to use a vendor. You're really new with feature flags. Use flag D. What is flag D? It's our open source implementation. So initially it was just a reference, something we used to kind of have an end-to-end project. And now it's slowly become a lot more popular and has gotten to the point where it's its own sub-project. And yeah, we've started developing its own single roadmap to maybe at some point have its own user interface and possibly become a real open source option or alternative to a vendor. So we've seen what the provider can do. We've seen kind of what it is. And now I just want to show you how much code you actually have to change. So I know this is a very basic example. So the only change you would have to make when switching provider is this little piece of code right here. This is all you're going to have to do. You're not going to have to refactor your code. You're not going to have to spend hours trying to understand what needs to be changed. You're going to be changing maybe 30 characters of code. All right. And here's just a small overview of our providers, or as we call it, our ecosystem. So we do have quite an extensive compatibility out there. One thing that is still missing or that we're working on is the Swift, all the providers for Swift, sorry, and providers for Python. So we actually recently had Spotify join in, and they donated their Swift SDK. And so we've been slowly building on top of that. And so probably in the next few weeks, I hope, it should be ready as well, or stable. All right, so 2 out of 4. We're getting to the third piece of the puzzle. So our evaluation context. We spoke at the beginning and said feature flags could be glorified if statements. I mean, sure, yes, but we can also have a lot more elaborate, or let's call them a lot more even dynamic evaluation contexts. And what this means is simply you'll be adding in more restraints or more, let's say, criteria for deciding whether this feature flag value will have to, let's say, be considered one way or another. The example we put here is, for example, is the country. So let's say you have a feature flag set up and you want it to appear only in Europe, or you want it to, I don't know, let's say you're Netflix and you have a series of films that are only available in Europe because you had, I don't know, licensing, copyright issues, call them whatever you want. You could do this via feature flag. And this feature flag will take the context, okay, current access is happening, this user is based in Europe. They will not have access to this content, or they will have access to different content. So this is kind of a way of really setting up the questions that your flag needs to have answers to in order to give the correct value. And yeah, I think important to remember is our specification kind of gives you a standard for how the data is transmitted and what data is transmitted. but the interpretation will always happen on the back end. So if your provider doesn't support it correctly, or your vendor that you're using, this is a matter of really rewriting the provider and doing it correctly. But for the ones we have available, we haven't noticed this problem for now, and we've been quite careful about it, I would say. And finally, we have a last piece of the puzzle, which are hooks. So I would say we can have, again, here 4 categories. The before part can add information to your context. So this is, for example, this is something that you don't want if you need to have, for example, records or public services or something like that. You wouldn't want to have a before hook providing additional information, because this could really change the outcome. The after instead are, in the case of a successful evaluation of a feature flag, this will simply give you the value. And if you have gone into a more detailed evaluation API, a more detailed evaluation, you could also get additional information. This is the part where you would get information that's useful for telemetry and and similar. Instead, the error part, obviously, this is in the case in which it does not succeed. You will get error messages. You will also have information that could be useful for telemetry. Let's say these two only happen, obviously, in the case in which something succeeds or it doesn't. Finally, instead, the last part, you'll have no matter what happens. So this simply means the evaluation was executed. You don't know if this was successful or not. But this is the point in which you can get, let's say, additional information. All right. So a few best practices for feature flagging. Plan and document. Yes, every time I say document, I feel people die inside a little bit. This is simply, you need to know which feature flags are in your code. Otherwise, you'll have maybe someone else creating another feature flag that conflicts with yours or doesn't have the same criteria in the evaluation context, and you could end up having a real mess. I think part of this is essentially also having a life cycle determined for your feature flags. How long will this flag be there? Will it stay there forever? It shouldn't, I hope. If it does, I want to see in 20 years what your code base looks like. And yeah, so flag lifecycle, yes. And monitoring and metrics. I work for an observability company, so metrics are a big thing. With feature flags, you can also focus a lot on the analytics side of it. So this is about getting all the information, whether it be on performance, on more business-focused analytics. So how is this change performing amongst the users? This is a real way to get useful information that can justify making a change, or it can also give you the real opportunity to roll back and say, okay, this is just not a good idea. Or simply, sorry, not roll back, but disable your flag, your feature. And flag ownership and permissions. So here it's a lot more about who has the right permissions to be able to modify or enable or disable these features, as well as which users will have access to this. Before, I made the example of, for example, Slack doing this, or and pretty much any service where you have a paid tier and a free tier, you'll have different features based on your level of membership. So using this level, the permissions, you can really differentiate who can see these features. This could be also something useful when trying something new. enabling, for example, only people within your company, so with your company domain and their email address to be able to access these features. Rollback plans, well, do you really need them with feature flags? Well, of course, you're always going to need them. But again, feature flags will simplify the way you do things. If you see there are real issues with the features you've implemented, there's always the chance of just disabling it. And yeah, graceful degradation. I like this word. As I said before, feature flags should not live in your code forever. You should have a real plan on how to get rid of them. If this feature is something successful you want to keep, you'll have to consider changing your code slightly and making sure that this remains and becomes a permanent feature rather than something that can be enabled and disabled. And at the same time, you need to keep a very specific, detailed documentation of what features are enabled and what the effects are. So this kind of ties into the first point again. And here, I'm kind of going to bring it to an end. And that's simply what I like for you to do today is join our Slack channel, have a look at what is happening in the project. We have GitHub discussions. Everything happens very much in the open. We have people come in that just want to learn more about feature flags in general. We have a lot of people that come in just wanting to contribute and to get started with feature flags. Every other week, actually right now, we have a community meeting. This is an open spot where people, both regular maintainers, contributors, or whatnot, can chime in and express ideas or plans or concerns. But it's also space for new people joining in. And yeah, so why not take the chance and get started with feature flags today? Maybe the final thing I'll show you is actually next week here in London, there will be, in 2 weeks, there will be a workshop with our DevRel lead, Andy Grapna, and the CEO of Flagsmith. So they'll be talking about feature flags and going to a lot more technical depth than I did today. So if you have the chance, sign up. I think the workshop is free. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Questions? Oh, yeah. I don't know what time it is, but
1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Is there anything we lose by using OpenFeature, like vendor-specific features?
Not really. So that's kind of the whole point of working with the vendors was to make sure we had this kind of level of compatibility. So you don't really lose anything. I pretty much you have mostly to gain out of it. It's just having this flexibility. You don't have vendor lock-in. Yeah, there could be some features that you lose, but most of those depend on the fact that the providers don't exist for those languages yet. That's like the biggest setback right now is, for example, we don't have any providers written for Python. So if you have something in Python, you won't be able to use OpenFeature there. That's pretty much it for now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Is there a provider for Azure App Configuration, by the way?
Sorry?
Is there a provider for Azure App Configuration, by the way? That was one of the ones I couldn't see, but I didn't know if there was anything planned.
No, there's not. No.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. That was a lot deeper than I knew feature flags were really about. I guess I had a quite simplistic idea of what they were. I had no idea there were even providers for feature flags. So maybe this question is related. What do you do about features which have dependencies? That's the first question. So if a feature enables other features to be enabled, or does that mean you've gone too far, or is that an anti-pattern?
Yeah,
and secondly, actually, yeah, I'll leave that first.
I was just going to say, I don't know if that would be really a best practice to have a feature dependent on another. I mean, I guess you would have, rather than having something like that, you would have a lot more requirements in that you would need from your context. So when you're evaluating the context to decide how or what should be done with that feature, you would have more, or you would ask for more information there rather than having interdependent features or feature flags, I would say. Interdependent features, I mean, that's on you.
Okay. I thought perhaps it might be something that's managed on the provider side. So, because I'm obviously missing a lot of context, is a provider providing the means to control the state of features in different environments?
So the provider is essentially the feature flag management system, which would be coming from a vendor like LaunchDarkly, Flagsmith, Split. So they would be the ones actually controlling. They would have the control over a feature flag. The rest of it is mostly the glue that holds it together. Let's put it like that. It just provides these layers of translation and can simplify the evaluation stage. But the real enable, disable, or management part really happens on the back end. So that really depends on the vendor or your DIY solution, or if you're using an open source solution as well. It would depend on that.
Okay, thanks. So where I work, there are feature flags in use, and so that's an in-house database that's serving features. But I think that the features for one application is they're only evaluated on startup. So picking up new features requires a restart of the application. And a question on monitoring has come to me just yesterday, actually, which was how can we tell that an enabled feature has actually been picked up in production? How can we compare? So I've got ideas about how that could be instrumented and alerted on. But I wondered if you had anything in your project that might address things like this.
So that would be with the hooks. So there was the after, there was the error, and then there's the finally. So you would get the different statuses there with that. Like that would kind of be your source of information.
But so do you have any plans in your project to expose that as telemetry that could be then alerted on or used?
So we're actually,
for example, metric states, state time series with ones or zeros or something like this.
Yeah, so we're actually OpenTelemetry compatible. So we worked with OpenTelemetry to kind of be kind of out of the box compatible with OpenTelemetry. So that was, I think, one of the longest standing PRs we had. It took like 4 months to get it merged. So it's there. Yeah, cool. You can get all your telemetry data.
All right. Thank you.
So this question isn't necessarily specific to OpenFeature itself, but it's just more of a general feature flags question. I think that we've all had that experience of, one of our favorite apps adding a feature that we're like a beta tester for, and then we're like, oh, what is this crap? Like, I hate it. Get rid of it. How do I get rid of it? And that's always kind of got me wondering, how do you determine the sweet spot for your sample size? Because I feel like for A/B testing, if you have too low a proportion of your users, the data you get back on whether or not people like it and whether or not it's increasing engagement might actually be pretty skewed, versus if you do too big of a sample size, you might, and there are issues with your new feature, then you might suddenly get a lot of consumers complaining about problems in your app, right? So I've always kind of wondered, like, what's the best way to determine that, or like determine what users too would be even good for testing?
So that's like feels like you're talking about a very recent change that happened in Slack, not to mention one specifically.
I mean, it happens in Spotify a lot, to be fair.
Well. Yeah, fair enough.
And I noticed they're one of your consumers, so yeah.
Oh, no. So those were just examples of like
of people that use feature flags.
Like Spotify. Oh yeah, Spotify is an adopter. We don't know exactly to what extent yet. We just know they are adopting. That's how far we got with them.
Okay.
That's the answer to that question has a very statistical basis.
Okay.
Like I wouldn't say that's really something determined necessarily on a feature flag level, like that would be really, yeah, on a like what kind, that's really determining your user base, what the composition is, and yeah, I don't have a good answer there.
Okay.
Like that's like real. Probably Dave McAllister would be able to answer that better.
The person who last presented. Yeah.
Yeah, he would probably be able to answer that a lot better.
Probably. Okay. All right. Thanks anyway.
Yeah, sorry. I think they're.
Hey, you mentioned lifecycle management. Is there anything? I just wondered if there was anything in OpenFeature which helped with that. So what we'd like to be able to do is put product managers in control of switching on features, but we don't want them to do it till it's ready. So
Yeah. I mean, I would say that was again something that belongs a lot in the back end. So that would be really something that either is built into your whatever backend you have, whether it be DIY or a vendor again or open source. That would be something that's built in there. Yeah, it wouldn't be some. It's not something that we would control really in OpenFeature or have any way to manage. Yeah.
thank you.
I have a question as well. Thanks for the presentation. It was great in that sense. I have a security background in access management and identity access management. In that sense, how it is functionally implemented inside the code is pretty like the authorization servers once were doing. So the question is, are there parties that are using this for some in authorization purposes? And also, did you check Open Policy Agent or similar OIDC stuff? After all, it's kind of a go or no go decision.
So, from a security perspective, I think we've looked a bit more, not so much security, we've looked more into the data privacy part. Again, I think the security part and the permissions would really be something. This is always, I feel like I'm always pushing it back on the vendors and your DIY solutions, but this is something that kind of ends up there because it's the real management part. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure how to answer that. If you want, I can.
No,
check
it's
it
just
and
food for thought. It looks
Okay.
pretty alike, and it might evolve at some point with the crowd there.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. My question is basically based on my experience. I've basically been into feature flags experimentation for like 3 years now, and I think 2 years ago I was building or replacing our existing in-house feature flag experimentation platform and integrating to a third-party provider. We did some analysis, landed on Optimizely, and I noticed Optimizely was not in your slides at all. Optimizely. So that was the vendor that. So I wanted to ask if you had any third-party integration or support with Optimizely itself. Yeah. And the second part as well has to do with metrics itself. Yeah. So I know you covered a lot about feature flags, but important with experiments especially is how to predict if your experiment is actually winning, and there's a lot of statistics and craziness that goes into that. So I wanted to know what role. It seems like OpenFeature is like the framework itself, kind of into like the SDK, kind of like something I built. Yeah, but it's more open source and standard, whereas the vendor still has full control over like deciding what feature flag to serve or how to like receive the metrics.
Yeah, so I would say like the enablement part comes from the vendors. So the enablement part definitely comes from the vendors. The observability and analytics would be coming from something like Dynatrace, like Splunk, like Datadog, like many others. So probably if you're looking for the data to understand whether it's a win or not, you would get it from your preferred observability platform. I mean, it's sorry. That I know of for now, there isn't. I mean, there are some vendors that have third-party integrations directly with observability platforms as well. Yeah. Yeah, I don't.
Hello. Hi. Thanks, David, for this talk. I've been a long-time user of feature flagging solutions and also struggled with switching vendors. So thanks for OpenFeature and the team behind it. I haven't had a chance to use it yet, but look forward to using it. Since we're on this topic, I know that some people have, and you as well have spoken about the life cycle of feature flags. My question is probably not related to OpenFeature itself, but sort of an extension of that, as to what kind of testing strategies have you seen in practice from some of the teams that use feature flags extensively in their CI processes to make sure that with the possible with all the combinations of feature flag settings possible at a given time, how do you test those in your application before deploying an application?
So, I mean, there are a few parts to that question. So you would have definitely, if you want to have combinations of different feature flags, you would have them set up in what you would also call variants. I don't know if that's a term everyone used, to be honest, or if it's basically kind of groupings of different feature flags. That can be a way to test the different combinations. Can I say if there's a good strategy or a better strategy for testing them? Honestly, I mean, if you're looking on the code level of functionality, that falls into like just coding best practices. I would say like the testing doesn't really change that much in the moment in which you have a feature flag. You'll still be testing the code the same way you would usually, just that you have the possibility of switching on and off a feature. Yeah, I think that's I wouldn't know how else to answer that, to be honest.
So is it just that teams use some sort of logical grouping to reduce the number of combinations of feature flag configurations possible to test?
I mean, I think that would be something that ends up kind of on a very PM-ish kind of role side, because you're going to be looking at what type of functionalities / features do you want your customers to have and which ones work well together and get the best results. Again, I haven't had enough experience to say if there's a better or preferred way to do it.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. All right. And all right, I think that's it. I'll hand over to the next speakers, and thank you everyone very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.